Alright, welcome back. In this final tutorial for Photoshop project-specific techniques, video number 3, we are going to be looking at the making the final touches on the design with working with some of Photoshop's filtering tools. So we'll look at very specific tools today from the Adjustment Filters tab or panel, and we will also look at something called Smart Filters. So let's get started. First off, I'd like to take a look and show you what adjustment filters are. And really, in Photoshop, this is kind of an area where working with filters is also something Photoshop is known for, both in a good way and sometimes in a bad way, when used incorrectly. Filters, if you may notice from up here on the top menu bar, there is a menu option that is just called Filter. And this actually gives you access to all of the different types of filtering options and tools that are built into Photoshop. So there are quite a few different things inside here that you can use for modifying or enhancing your image. Now, the best way for using any filter whenever you think you're going to use it, honestly, is to do it in moderation or to do it in small increments or small amounts. Overdoing an effect can easily ruin the quality or style of an image and can push it sometimes too far, and often results in what we call a photoshopped image that often looks too over-edited and over-filtered, and it stops looking very good. So we're going to work with these, but we're not going to touch the filters yet from there. What I'd like to show you first is when working with filters in Photoshop, really the best method for doing any of it is doing it in a way that preserves the imagery in the design by doing non-destructive editing approaches. So another method for using non-destructive editing inside of Photoshop is to use adjustment filters from the Adjustments panel. So if you don't see the Adjustments panel on the right side of your screen over here, it's this little tab that says Adjustments. If you don't see it there, just make sure to go to Window from the top menu and turn Adjustments on. But this is the Adjustments panel. Now there's not much to look at in here. It's actually just a small collection of icons, and each of these is actually a separate filtering tool that you can apply as a new layer inside of your layer stack. That way it doesn't actually apply it directly on top of a layer and ruining the pixel data, which is what will happen if you use one of these first on a regular layer. So we're going to start over here. And when working with these filter tools, often they're much more effective when used together with multiple filters to achieve a certain effect. Now we're going to use several filters to work together for our design. To sort of change the mood of the imagery. Right now everything is actually, for a finished image, this is not bad. But what if we wanted to change up the mood a bit and work to enhance it? Or maybe we wanted to adjust the contrast of certain parts of imagery inside the design. Or maybe add a vignette filter around the outside edges, change the color, maybe add an overlay across the surface that changes an overall color tint for the image. All of those things can be achieved, or most of those things can be achieved by using filters. So let's take a look over here at Adjustments. So I'm going to start off by working with just this basic one at the front on the top here that says Brightness and Contrast. Let's go ahead and click that icon. Looks like a little sun. When I turn it on, two things happen. Number one, a little Properties panel pops out on the side of the panels here, and we get a brand new layer on our stack of layers in our Photoshop area, and it's called Brightness Contrast. And what brightness and contrast allow you to control are just that. You can adjust the brightness of all the pixels in the image, or the contrast level, which is to enhance the brightness or darkness of all pixels. So let's see what brightness does when we adjust this slider. So I'm going to click it and drag it. I'm going to pull it towards the left. So notice as I pull it towards the left that the effect makes everything much darker. So it's actually a brightness reduction whenever you pull it that way. Now let's pull it to the other side, and I'm going to add and go past 0 And notice that all the pixels slowly get brighter. Now, pixels that already have a lot of brightness already in them are going to be enhanced greatly or punched so much that they lose definition. When you get pure white out of a pixel, that means that it no longer has detail usually. So that's what brightness does. Now let's see contrast on its own. So I'm going to drag contrast down. Notice as I drag contrast, the effect is very, very subtle. You sometimes have to bounce back and forth to see the differences, which can be easy with this with adjustment filters. It's actually really easy on this panel. So let's say I pull it all the way over here to see it this way. How do you know if you've done something really big to it? Right here, you can adjust it by turning the effect off and on with the eyeball, just to see the difference between having the filter on or having it turned off. So when I pull contrast all the way down here to -50, it's actually pulling down the contrast and reducing contrast in the screen, which means it's flattening out colors and giving them less of a pure dark and less of a pure white. Now traditionally when working with photos, it's always good to have a little bit of a pure white and a pure dark in the image to kind of enhance the quality of the imagery, to help things stand out ultimately. So I'm just going to punch the contrast just a little bit. Now notice if I take it all the way over, things get extremely dark in the blacks and extremely white in the whites. So that's what hard contrast or heavy contrast can do to an image. Again, too far can be too much, right? That's where we do our effect in moderation. So I'm just going to push it just a little bit to give overall a contrast boost to my image. So I'm going to check it by flipping the eye off and on, just to see the difference. Subtlety can be enough to make all the difference. Okay, that's how brightness and contrast work. Now there are many different filters in here that can control different effects to your image. These first top ones all control brightness and darkness of the overall of an image or a layer. Something else that's unique about working with adjustment layers is that you can actually clip them onto an individual layer. Right now, with it sitting in my layer stack like this, it actually affects all layers down below it. So notice this, if I change its position and I bring it down, let's say just above the clouds, then only the clouds are affected by the contrast change. See that? Only the clouds get affected, and it's all because its position in the layer stack has changed. If I bring it up above the water, now the clouds and the water both get affected. Bring it above the tree, now all three of those layers are affected. So you can see that this effect of filters inside of the layer stack, it's important to understand where you put the filter because it can affect the image underneath it, all of them. But we can tell Photoshop that we want to lock down this filter to only affect the layer that's directly below it instead. So let's say I want to add contrast, but only onto the, and I want it to be all the way up here because I want it to affect the rocks. So the real problem I'll run into if I leave it all the way up here at the top or under the rocks is that it's going to affect everything down below. So if I don't want it to affect everything, I need to tell it to lock down. Now, this is funny because it already did it for me, and the reason for that is because I got between a layer that was already clipped, my shadows, if you remember we converted that into a clipping layer, but it automatically clips it down because that's already there, and if I move it out from under it, it still keeps it locked on. If I don't want it clipping anymore, I can hit this little icon on the property panel for brightness contrast, and it will unclip it and let it be activated on all layers in the design. So, just so you're aware that that can happen. And you can even use it to your advantage to, again, adjust contrast for individual imagery inside of your scene. Alright, so now that we have that turned on and activated, let's go ahead and look at another effect here. Some other ones that are great are like the histogram tool. Histogram is another way of measuring light and dark tones in a scene, but also controlling them in the way of contrast. So I can actually pull sliders for lightness or the measured layers of darkness within the entire scene. And then I can use the Grayscale Mini slider here in the middle to adjust overall midtone contrast. So levels are really, if you notice this, it's a visual histogram, and it just measures the overall dark pixels, midtone pixels, and white pixels in the scene. And so you often can see the readout that looks like this. It might look like a little bit of a bell curve or something of that sort. And sometimes if you want to add contrast, it's just a matter of pulling in the white and the black on each end to clip or cut off any detail beyond a certain measured level of darkness. All right, so that's contrast. Now if you don't like a filter you've dropped in, you can select it in the layers and just hit delete. Oh. Make sure you don't have a value selected inside there like I did. Just hit return if you do, and that'll activate it, and then hit delete. There we go. All right. Now one that I do want to add to this, let's say I want to increase, like maybe make the feeling of this scene feel a little more gloomy, a little more sad. What I'm going to add into this scene is going to be an exposure adjustment that sort of semi-darkens everything. So I'm going to use the exposure filter. And I'm just going to adjust the exposure by dragging it down just a little bit to kind of darken the overall effect of the scene. Give it a little more drama. All right. After that, now what I'm going to do, and these are just, again, a couple different filters. I'm going to go ahead and add one more filter to this. I'm going to go to my, let's go to photo filter. And I'm going to add in photo filter. And it is important, something else to notice is that when you stack these, they affect each other in different ways based on the order they're stacked in. I'm going to take this photo filter and actually drop it below my brightness. And we're going to actually make the scene a little more gloomy. So I'm going to actually increase like a different color over this, maybe green. You want to kind of give it like a stormy kind of effect. Green skies always make things feel a little bit more gloomy sometimes. So I'm going to just increase the green kind of effect here by adjusting a green filter. So again, all of these filters are great. They have some very wonderful things they can offer towards your design. So I'm just going to drop that on, increase it maybe a little bit to make it feel a little more gloomy. Another one I'll drop in for fun here is going to be the vibrance filter. What vibrance controls, actually vibrance will control the overall color enhancement within the image, so it can brighten or darken colors or reduce them. So vibrance, you'll notice, as I pull it up, the colors become much sharper and much deeper. But if I pull it down, gradually the colors get more and more washed out and start becoming more close to the grayscale spectrum. Vibrance and hue are different, or saturation. Saturate will do extreme color adjustments, even to the point of being black and white monochromatic. So if you wanted to convert an image to black and white, this filter, just by dragging the saturation all the way down, would be a great one to do. Easy enough. Alright, but I just want to adjust it just a little bit to where it feels a little more gloomy again, but not too much. Okay, there we go. So I just pulled down the vibrance just a smidge to give it a little more emotional feel to it. And we're going to pull in one more filter here, and we're going to add something to our scene by using what's called a smart filter. Now, to do smart filtering inside of Photoshop, you have to have a smart object layer first. So I'm going to create a new layer real quick. And what I'm going to create on top of my entire design is a vignette. If you're not familiar with vignettes, it's kind of that dark sort of circular area that can show kind of fuzzy grayed out area around the edge of an image. That basically simulates classic black and white darkroom photography of where parts of the outer edge would be blocked out by the lens or the negative when it was shot. So we're going to do the same. So I created a new layer from the base of my layer panel. There it is at the very top, which is where you need it. If it's down here somewhere when you generate it, drag it all the way up to the top. Leave it up there. Now we're going to fill this layer in. So we're going to do Shift-Delete. And we're going to fill it in with content, and we're going to change it to 50% gray. That's just a good neutral color to work with for filtering through. Now everything should cover up when you do that. You're in good shape if it looks like this on that layer. It should be gray. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Filter from the top menu. And we're going to go down to Lens Correction. Alright, now lens correction typically is used on basic photographs for adjusting various things like visual distortion within the photograph. If you shot it with a wide angle and you wanted to remove some of that distortion, you could do it with this tool. You can also remove vignetting, or you can add it. So notice as I drag this slider down that it starts to gain a black border around it. Now that's kind of a cool effect. Now you can also flip it the other way to where it adds a white border, but we want a black one that's a little bit different to sort of simulate that sort of classic effect in photography. And again, to enhance the effect of this sort of dark image that we're creating, this dark mood. So I'm just going to drag this in a little bit. And just to make the midpoint smaller in the image, that'll make it darker around the outer edges. You can bring it all the way in or just a little bit in. Now once we're done with that, you kind of achieve the look you like. You can go ahead and say OK at the top, and it will sandwich that onto that layer. Now here's an important thing to do, because I just did what I told you not to do. I told you to put the filter on as a smart filter, but we forgot to convert our layer. Oops. That's okay. We can always go back and undo things that we've done like this. So this is actually a great time to show you something called the History panel. Come up here on your panel list, and there should be a little icon that looks like 3 boxes and a little arrow. This is called History. Again, you can access it from Windows if you don't see it. What History shows you is a record of, I think, up to like 20 or 30 steps of activity that you've done in Photoshop that you can go back through easily by just clicking on each one to go back one step at a time. It's kind of a way of seeing all of the things you've done for up to 32 clicks or changes in Photoshop as an undo menu. You can undo all the way back to a certain degree, and then you can just go back to the original image or where you started when you opened it. So I'm just going to go down here, and I'm just going to pull this back until I get to where I didn't add the filter. Actually, I want to add it up to the fill and then stop right there, because I don't want the lens correction filter added yet. So I want it back to where I filled the layer in with gray. All right, now from here we're going to convert this layer into a smart object. So with it selected, I'm going to go to Layer, Smart Objects, Convert. Okay. Now you notice that when I did that, it actually removed the filter option down below here, because once you change something, if you go back a few steps, the other steps get lost instantly. So just be aware of that when adjusting edits, if you're going to use the history bar. All right, now we got that on. Let's go back to filter. Let's go back to lens correction. And actually, here's a cool thing to know. When you do lens correction or a filter, if you want to repeat it instantly, it will have it listed up here at the top of your filter menu as the last edit that you've done with a filter. You can actually reuse a filter again by just clicking on that option, and it will open up the filter menu. So I'm going to just drag my amount down, pull down my midpoint, say OK. Now notice that when I do a smart filter, look what happens to my layer over here. Below my layer, it now lists whatever filter I have attached to my layer. And the cool thing about this is that I can actually double click on where it says lens correction to reactivate the lens correction options. So I can change it and make adjustments to it, and it will update automatically out here. And the best news is I can do this as many times as I want to without ruining the pixel data in my original image. So again, a benefit of using lens correction or smart filters that is non-destructive editing to your work. All right. You can also stack as many filters as you want on a single layer. This is the only one I've added. You can obviously look up here under filter, and there are many different kinds that you can add into a scene. A lot of these are very interesting and do some very odd and interesting things. Even these ones at the top, Liquify, just to point out, is a great one if you're trying to distort the shape of a photograph or an image or a shape of something. A lot of people have used this to sort of enhance the size of eyeballs on a person or the size of a feature. But you can also liquefy something to make it look more like water, basically pushing and bending pixels. Great tool to play with. Highly recommend it if it suits your project. All right. Now that we have this turned on, we still can't see our imagery through it. What we're going to do next is we're going to enhance this layer and adjust it to where we can see our imagery through it by just telling with Photoshop to tell Photoshop to knock out all of the gray tones and leave the dark tones behind. So how do we do that magic, right? So come up here into the top of your layers panel, see where it says normal. These are called blending modes, which basically allows you to take a layer and blend it above, to blend it over layers underneath it. So we're going to hit normal, and it's going to give us our entire list of blending modes that we can use. Now they're broken into categories of how they affect the image. Like these will lighten up an image in different increments. These will add contrast and blending. And these will overall sort of darken the image in different ways. So let's look and see just a couple of these. So I'm going to go to multiply. Notice multiply does darken the image quite a bit. This almost looks like a kind of wet collodion plate process that's classic to photography. But it is a little dark for our purposes. So I'm going to go back to multiply. And I'm going to slide down to the lighting effects. So I'm going to go to screen instead. Screen is interesting, but all it's done for us is really lighten the entire image. And I don't really want that. I want it to be darker, but still show the vignette. The vignette has been lost. It's been inverted, you could say. So this time, let's try overlay. Ah, there we are. So now with overlay turned on, it's added contrast to the image. It's blended the gray pixels in, but left the black ones around the edges. This is exactly what we're looking for. If I turn it off and on, it looks pretty good. So you can get even more effects by using these. And again, these are non-destructive as well. All right. Now we've actually gone through and we've added quite a few different filters to play with and manipulated them. There's really not anything else that we're going to do with this image. Again, I would suggest that you experiment and play with filters, experimenting with them on individual layers or stacking different ones together at the top, and see what they do. The last thing we need to do here is that I left a layer unnamed, which was this vignette that I created on this layer. Always make sure to rename layers that don't have a name already. Your filters, usually you can just leave these alone because they already come with a name. But when you're working with these that give you like layer 1 or whatever like that, rename it. So I'm going to call this vignette. There we go. Makes a little more sense now. All right. And that's all that we're going to be doing with this particular image. And the next video demo that we'll go through, we will discuss proper methods for saving and outputting your work for different formats. All right. Again, if you have any questions, please email. Or again, check with Adobe's help resources that it does have available for you for any specific things. And even with filters and effects, I would recommend even check things out online, see if there's any special tutorials people have put together. We've only shown you a small level of what you can do with Photoshop filters. There are many different effects you can achieve in here that we have not even touched base on. But some of these are the basics of basic compositing and just bringing images together. All right, hope you learned something new, and I will see you next time. Take care.